Sometimes the one decision that could get you killed is the same one that leads you to the love of your life. This is a story of a Black American woman named Marie Widener. Marie was the kind of woman who still believed the world rewarded good people. She was 26 years old, a hard-working expat living alone in Seoul, South Korea, far from home, far from family, surviving on a modest salary teaching English at a small academy in the Gangnam district. She wore her dark, curly hair pulled back in a messy bun. Her wardrobe was simple. Tonight, a soft olive green knit sweater and dark charcoal jeans, practical clothes for a woman who spent more time grading papers and riding the subway than going out. But what stood out about Marie, what everyone noticed, was her smile. It was wide, warm, completely unguarded, the kind of smile that made strangers on the street feel like she already trusted them. And that, in a city like Seoul, in a neighborhood like this, was either a gift or a death sentence. On a rainy Friday night, cutting through a back alley in the neon-lit night market district, Marie's foot kicked something heavy on the ground. A wallet, black leather, expensive, stuffed with a small fortune in American cash, no ID, no name, nothing to identify who it belonged to. Any reasonable person would have pocketed the money and disappeared into the rain. But Marie Widener was not wired like other people. She followed a faint trail of scattered bills through the alley, turned the corner, and walked straight toward a group of men who radiated danger the way a furnace radiates heat, bodyguards, flanking a man in a tailored black overcoat who looked like he commanded the entire city from the shadows. She smiled at him, held out the dripping wallet, and said the words that would change both of their lives forever. "Hey, excuse me, I think this is yours." What Marie didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the man staring at her in stunned silence was Dae Won-shik, the boss of the Gyeomhopa syndicate. A man with blood on his hands and a price on his head. A man so dangerous that even the police left him alone. And she had just done the one thing no one had ever done before. Walked up to him unarmed, unafraid, and honest. She had no idea that by tomorrow morning, the most powerful criminal organization in Seoul would know her name, her address, and her daily schedule. She had no idea that the man she just smiled at would move heaven, earth, and hell itself to see her again. And she had absolutely no idea that falling in love with him would nearly get her killed. The wallet sat in Marie's hands like a confession she wasn't ready to hear. She stood alone in that narrow alley behind the night market, rain tapping against her shoulders, and stared down at more money than she had ever held in her life. The bills were crisp, American hundreds, packed so tight into the black leather fold that the wallet couldn't even close properly. A few loose bills had already escaped, plastered to the wet pavement around her sneakers like fallen leaves. Marie's heart was pounding, not from fear, from something worse. Temptation. She could feel it crawling up her chest, whispering in a voice that sounded too much like reason. You work 60 hours a week. You eat ramyeon 4 nights out of 7. Your rent is 2 months late. Nobody saw you pick it up. Nobody knows. Just walk away. Walk away and your life changes tonight. Marie closed her eyes. The rain kept falling. A street vendor somewhere behind her was shouting about takoboki. A motorbike engine revved and faded. Seoul kept moving, indifferent and enormous, the way it always did a city that didn't care whether one broke American girl made a good decision or a bad one tonight. She opened her eyes and looked at the money again. Then she looked at the alley stretching out in front of her, dark, wet, glowing faintly with the reflected neon from the main road ahead. "No," she said out loud, quiet but firm, like she was settling an argument with herself. "No, Marie, this is somebody's. You're going to find them." She flipped the wallet open wider, searching. No ID, no credit cards, no photographs, just the cash and a single black card, heavy, matte, embossed with a symbol she didn't recognize. Some kind of corporate logo, maybe, or a club membership. It told her nothing. But the ground told her something. A trail of smaller bills, 10s and 20s, scattered ahead of her like a paper breadcrumb path, curling around the corner toward the bright, crowded main strip of the night market district. Whoever dropped this had been walking fast, hadn't noticed, kept moving. Marie tucked the wallet against her chest to shield it from the rain and followed the trail. She turned the corner, and the full chaos of the district hit her. The street was alive, steaming food stalls, clusters of drunk salarymen singing off-key, couples huddled under shared umbrellas. Neon signs stacked 3 stories high, reflecting off the rain-slicked asphalt in rivers of electric color. Pink, blue, gold, green. The air was thick with garlic, grilled pork belly, and the sweet chemical smell of soju spilling out of every open doorway. Marie's eyes swept the crowd, looking for someone who seemed like they'd lost something important. A businessman patting his pockets, a panicked face, anything. And then she saw him. He was standing beneath the awning of a lounge at the far end of the block, slightly removed from the crowd, like the crowd knew better than to stand too close. He was tall, taller than most of the men around him, with dark hair that was neatly styled but starting to come undone from the humidity. His clothes alone separated him from every other person on the street. A black overcoat draped across his shoulders, not worn but placed, like a king's robe. Beneath it, a charcoal vest over a black dress shirt, the collar open, no tie, everything tailored, everything expensive. His face was sharp, angular, almost unreasonably handsome, but his expression killed any warmth that face might have offered. He looked like a man who had been carved from stone and taught to distrust every living thing around him. His eyes moved constantly, scanning, calculating. He stood with the focused stillness of someone who had learned long ago that relaxation was a luxury that got people killed. And flanking him, 2 men, huge, broad-shouldered, thick-necked, stuffed into matching black suits that barely contained them. One stood with his hand raised, palm facing outward, a living stop sign. The other had his right hand tucked inside his jacket, fingers resting on something concealed. Everything about the scene screamed, "Turn around." But Marie had already locked eyes on the man's hands and she noticed it. His left hand kept drifting toward his hip, then stopping, patting, searching. The absent, frustrated motion of someone checking for something that should be in their pocket but isn't. That's him. Marie didn't hesitate. She stepped off the curb and walked directly toward the group. The bodyguard with the raised hand saw her first. His eyes snapped to her, not curious, not welcoming, predatory. He shifted his weight, widening his stance, and his palm went from a polite "stop" to a wall. The second guard's hand tightened inside his jacket. Marie heard a faint sound, the creak of leather adjusting, and some survival instinct deep in her brain tried to register what it meant. She ignored it. She kept walking. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice bright, cutting through the rain and the ambient noise like a bell. She was smiling, that wide, disarming grin she wore like armor she didn't know she had. "Hey, excuse me. I think this is yours." She held out the wallet. Open. Cash visible. Rain dripping off the leather and onto the $100 bills like the money meant absolutely nothing to her. The bodyguards didn't move. They didn't know what to do. In their entire professional careers, years of protecting this man from assassins, rivals, police, and traitors, no one had ever walked toward their boss smiling. No one had ever breached the perimeter armed with nothing but good intentions. Dae Won-shik looked at the wallet. Then he looked at Marie, then back at the wallet. His expression fractured just for a moment. The stone mask cracked, and underneath it was something raw. Confusion, shock, and something deeper. Something he hadn't felt in so long he almost didn't recognize it. Wonder. His hand came up not to take the wallet, but reflexively, defensively, as if this small woman in a knit sweater was somehow more dangerous than anyone who had ever pointed a gun at him. "I found it in the alley back there," Marie said, nodding over her shoulder. "You might want to be more careful. That's a lot of cash to be carrying around." She said it like she was giving advice to a friend. Casual. Easy. No agenda. Won-shik's mouth opened. For a moment, nothing came out. Then, quietly, almost to himself. "You are giving this back?" "Of course," Marie said, like the question itself was strange. "It's yours, isn't it?" He took the wallet slowly. His fingers brushed hers for half a second and he felt it. Something electric. Not romantic. Not yet, but significant. Like the universe had just shifted a single degree on its axis, and everything downstream was about to change. Marie gave a little wave. "Have a good night. Stay dry." And she turned around, walked back into the crowd, and disappeared into the rain like she had never been there at all. Won-shik stood motionless, holding the wallet, staring at the space where she had been. The rain kept falling. His senior bodyguard, Jae-hyun, leaned in cautiously. "Sir? Should we find out who she is?" Won-shik's voice had changed. The crack was gone. It was an order absolute, iron, non-negotiable. Her name, where she lives, where she works, everything. "Sir, she just returned a wall. Everything. By morning." By 9 a.m. the next day, Won-shik had a file. Her name was Marie Widener, American, 26, no family in Korea. She taught English at a small private academy called Bright Path Language Institute in the Seoul district, a modest storefront school squeezed between a convenience store and a nail salon. He went alone. That was the part that made his men nervous. Dae Won-shik did not go anywhere alone. He hadn't walked a street without armed escort in over 8 years. But that morning he told Jae-hyun and the others to stay behind. He put on a simple navy coat, no overcoat, no vest, no visible wealth. He looked, for the first time in years, like a normal man. He waited across the street from the academy, standing under the awning of a coffee shop, until he saw her through the window. She was sitting at a small desk, laughing with a group of teenage students, using exaggerated hand gestures to explain something. Her curly hair was down today, falling around her shoulders. She was wearing a cream-colored blouse and the same easy, open expression she'd worn in the rain the night before. Won-shik watched her for a full minute before crossing the street. He walked in during her break. The receptionist looked up, slightly alarmed by the tall, sharp-featured man standing in the lobby, and before she could speak, Marie appeared from the back room holding a mug of tea. She froze. Then her face lit up with recognition. "Oh, wallet guy." Won-shik almost laughed. "Almost. I wanted to thank you properly," he said. His Korean was precise, formal. He switched to English when he saw her relief. "You saved me a great deal of trouble last night." "It was just a wallet," Marie said. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," he said quietly. "They wouldn't have." He introduced himself as Dae Won-shik, but the version of himself he offered her was a carefully constructed fiction, CEO of a private investment firm. Very busy, very private. He apologized for the intimidating men she'd encountered the night before and explained them away as corporate security, a precaution for someone in his position. Marie accepted it without question. They talked for 12 minutes. He asked about her life in Korea. She asked about his work. He lied fluently about quarterly reports and board meetings while she told him the truth about homesickness, bad kimchi attempts, and the joy of watching her students finally nail a difficult English phrase. When he left, he asked if he could take her to dinner to properly thank her. She said yes. Their first date was at a quiet, upscale restaurant in Itaewon, not the flashiest place Won-shik could have chosen, but deliberate, intimate. He wanted her comfortable, not overwhelmed. He wore a dark suit, clean and sharp but understated. He was trying, for the first time in his adult life, to be a man instead of a title. Marie arrived in a simple black dress she'd borrowed from a coworker named Soo-yeon, her curly hair loose and natural, gold earrings catching the candlelight. She looked beautiful and completely unaware of it, which made her more beautiful. She had told Soo-yeon about him that afternoon while picking up the dress. "He's intense," Marie had said, trying to find the right word. Like, really intense, but gentle. I don't know how to explain it. Soo-yeon had raised an eyebrow. handed her the dress, and said, "Just be careful, Marie. The intense ones always have a reason." Marie had laughed it off. She wouldn't remember those words for weeks. They talked for 3 hours. Marie told him about growing up in Virginia, about her mother who had raised 4 children alone, about the leap of faith it had taken to move to Korea on her own. Won-shik listened in a way he had never listened to anyone, not for information, not for leverage, but because he genuinely wanted to hear her. And when she asked about him, about his family, his childhood, his work, he told her pieces of the truth wrapped in layers of fiction. His father had been a powerful man. True, his father had been the previous syndicate boss. He had inherited the family business young. True, he had taken control of the Jumho-pa at 23 after his father's assassination. He worked long hours and sometimes the job was stressful. True, last Tuesday he had personally overseen the interrogation of a man who had stolen from him. But what he couldn't fake, what kept leaking through the performance, was the peace. Sitting across from Marie, watching her laugh, listening to her tell a rambling story about accidentally buying fermented shrimp paste thinking it was yogurt, Won-shik felt something he hadn't experienced since childhood. Stillness, quiet. A moment where the paranoia, the violence, and the constant threat assessment in his mind just stopped. When his phone buzzed halfway through dessert, a disposable phone, one of 3 he carried, vibrating with a message about a shipment dispute at the Incheon docks, he silenced it without looking. When Marie noticed the bruises across his knuckles and asked what happened, he smiled and said he'd started boxing for exercise. When she reached across the table and touched his hand, he flinched not from pain, but from the unfamiliar shock of being touched by someone who wanted nothing from him. He walked her home that night. She lived in a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat in Mapogu. She thanked him at the door, stood on her toes, and kissed him on the cheek. Won-shik stood on that sidewalk for a full minute after she went inside. Then he called Jae-hyun and ordered a security detail posted on her block, invisible, 24 hours, rotating shifts. She would never know. But from that night forward, Marie Widener became the most protected woman in Seoul. Over the next several weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Dinners, weekend walks along the Han River. A day trip to a temple in the mountains where Marie made him take selfies he pretended to hate but secretly saved every single one. Won-shik was meticulous about his disguise. He never let his 2 worlds touch. He scheduled their dates around his operations. He swapped phones before seeing her so she'd never hear the wrong one ring. He wore long sleeves to cover the fresh bruises, and gloves when the cuts on his hands were too obvious to explain. But even Won-shik's world had cracks he couldn't fully seal. One evening, as they left a restaurant in Apgujeong, a black SUV slowed at the curb. Won-shik's entire body changed in an instant. His hand found Marie's waist, his eyes locked onto the vehicle, and his jaw set like stone. The SUV passed without stopping, but Marie caught the look on his face. Raw, focused hatred. She'd never seen that expression on him before. "Do you know them?" she asked. "Old business rival," he said. His voice was level, but the hand on her waist didn't relax for another full block. What he didn't tell her was that the SUV belonged to Kang Sung-jin, the head of a rival syndicate that had been trying to dismantle Won-shik's empire for years. Their war was fought in shadows, hijacked shipments, disappeared lieutenants, messages delivered in blood. Kang was patient, ruthless, and obsessed with finding the one crack in Won-shik's armor. Marie filed the moment away. She was paying attention more than Won-shik realized. It started small. Little moments that didn't quite add up, that she stored in the back of her mind without fully examining. The way a restaurant owner, upon seeing Won-shik walk through the door, turned white and personally escorted them to the best table hands trembling. The way pedestrians on the street would glance at Won-shik's face, then quickly cross to the other side, avoiding eye contact like he was something to survive, not pass by. The waiter who spilled water, then apologized so profusely he was nearly in tears, not embarrassed, but terrified. Then there was the money. Won-shik never used a credit card, not once. Every meal, every gift, Every experience was paid for in cash, thick rolls of crisp bills pulled from his coat pocket without counting. When Marie joked that he must not trust banks, he laughed it off, but his eyes didn't laugh with him. And the vigilance. Won-shik never sat with his back to a door. He always chose the table in the corner with the clearest sightline to every exit. His eyes never stopped moving, scanning faces in the crowd, checking reflections in windows, cataloging every person who walked too close or lingered too long. When a car backfired one evening while they were walking through Myeongdong, Won-shik's hand shot to Marie's waist and he physically pulled her behind him before she even registered the sound. His body was rigid, coiled, his free hand reaching toward his lower back, reaching for something that wasn't there, or something he'd left behind for the night. "Just reflexes," he said when she stared at him. "Old habits." Marie nodded and let it go. But that night, lying in her tiny apartment staring at the ceiling, she replayed every strange moment. The fear in people's eyes, the cash, the bruised knuckles, the way his entire body could transform from warm and tender to cold and coiled in half a second, the black SUV, and the hatred that had flashed across his face. Something wasn't right about Dae Won-shik. She could feel it, a shadow behind the man she was falling in love with, something large and dark and patient, waiting just out of sight. She thought about asking him. She even typed a message once. "Can we talk about something? I need to understand some things," then deleted it, character by character. Because the truth was, she was afraid of the answer. Not afraid of him. Afraid that the answer would force her to leave, and she wasn't ready for that. So Marie made a choice that she would later look back on with complicated feelings. She decided to trust him a little longer, to believe that whatever Won-shik was hiding, it wasn't bigger than what they were building together. She was wrong about that. But she wouldn't know it for another 2 weeks. And somewhere across the city, in a smoke-filled room above a Gangnam nightclub, Kang Sung-jin, the man from the black SUV, the man who had been trying to destroy Dae Won-shik for years, received a photograph. It showed Won-shik walking along the Han River, his arm around a young black woman, his face open and unguarded in a way his enemies had never seen before. Kang stared at the photograph for a long time. Then he smiled. He had finally found what the untouchable Dae Won-shik cared about. Before we continue, go ahead and subscribe, like, and share where you're watching from. It always warms my heart to see our little storytelling family stretch across the world. Every click, every comment, every bit of love you give helps us keep uncovering these unforgettable stories together. So find your quiet place, settle in, and let me take you somewhere you've never been before. Won-shik told her to pack a bag for the weekend but wouldn't say where they were going. He picked her up on a Saturday morning in a black sedan, no driver, no bodyguards, just him behind the wheel wearing a simple charcoal sweater and dark jeans, looking more relaxed than Marie had ever seen him. She climbed into the passenger seat with a small overnight bag and a suspicious grin. "You're not going to tell me, are you?" "No." "Not even a hint?" "No." "Is it far?" He glanced at her sideways, and the corner of his mouth lifted that rare, almost smile she had learned to treasure. "Just trust me." They drove for 2 hours. The city melted away, first the skyscrapers, then the suburbs. Then the highway gave way to winding mountain roads canopied by trees just beginning to turn amber and gold. Marie watched the scenery change through the window, her hand resting on his arm, and felt something she hadn't felt since she was a child. Safe. Completely, unreasonably safe. The estate appeared like something out of a film. It sat at the end of a private road, a traditional Korean hanok, but massive, restored with modern luxury. Dark wooden beams and curved tile roofs, surrounded by manicured gardens, stone pathways, and a koi pond that caught the afternoon light in flashes of orange and white. Beyond the gardens, the mountains rose in soft green ridges, disappearing into low clouds. There was no noise, no traffic, no neon. Just wind through the trees and the distant sound of water moving over rocks. Marie stood in the courtyard and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. Won-shik. What is this place? It was my mother's, he said. His voice was quiet, and for a moment, Marie heard something new in it, not the controlled authority he wore like armor, but something tender and bruised. She loved it here. It was the only place my father couldn't reach her. It was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. Marie knew it instinctively, the way you know when someone has stopped performing and started speaking from a place they usually keep locked. She took his hand. He let her. They spent the day doing nothing extraordinary, and that was what made it perfect. Wan Shik cooked for her, something Marie hadn't expected. He made doenjang jjigae and grilled mackerel, moving around the kitchen with the quiet competence of someone who had learned to cook young, before the money and the power and the people who did everything for him. Marie sat on the counter, legs swinging, stealing pieces of pickled radish and asking questions he normally deflected. But here, in this place, away from the city and the bodyguards and the disposable phones, he answered them. He told her about his mother, a gentle woman who had died when he was 15. He told her that he had been raised by people who valued strength over kindness, and that for most of his life he had believed vulnerability was a weakness that would get him killed. He told her that meeting her, the woman who walked past armed men and returned wallets full of cash like it was nothing had broken, something open inside him that he didn't know how to close again. He did not tell her what he actually did for a living. That was the one door he kept shut, even here, even now, because he knew with the certainty of a man who had seen how the truth destroyed things, that the moment she knew, she would leave. And he was not ready to lose her. After dinner, they sat on the wooden veranda facing the mountains. The sun was going down, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. Marie leaned against his shoulder. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke. Wan Shik? I'm falling in love with you. She said it simply. No drama, no trembling voice. Just the truth, offered openly, the same way she had offered him his wallet on that rainy street, like honesty was the only currency she understood. Wan Shik didn't answer immediately. He stared at the mountains. His jaw tightened. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, barely above a whisper. You shouldn't. Too late. He turned to look at her. In the fading light, Marie could see something she had never seen on his face before: fear. Not the calculated caution she had noticed in restaurants and on crowded streets. Real fear. The kind that comes from wanting something so desperately that the thought of losing it becomes unbearable. Marie! He took her face in both hands. Hands that had done things she couldn't imagine. Hands that were somehow impossibly gentle against her skin. I don't deserve you. You need to know that. That's my decision to make, she said. Not yours. He kissed her, slowly, like a man who had been holding his breath for years and was finally allowing himself to exhale. And somewhere, far away, in a parking garage beneath a Gangnam nightclub, a man named Jaehyun Wan Shik's most senior bodyguard, the man who had stood behind him the night Marie returned. The wallet was sitting across from Kang Sung-jin, accepting an envelope thick with cash. Where is he? Kang asked. The mountain estate. He'll be back in the city tomorrow night. He's taking the woman to dinner in Myeongdong. Kang smiled. Perfect. They came back to Seoul on Sunday evening, and Wan Shik made reservations at a small Italian restaurant tucked into a quiet side street in Myeongdong, the kind of place with white tablecloths, candlelight, and only 12 tables. Marie wore a burgundy dress she had bought that afternoon, the first piece of clothing she'd purchased for herself in months. Wan Shik wore a dark suit, no tie, his heavy coat slung across the back of his chair rather than draped over his shoulders, a small thing. But Marie noticed. He was letting his guard down. And tonight, for the first time, he actually looked it. The weekend in the mountains had done something to him. His shoulders were lower. His eyes lingered on Marie instead of scanning the room. He laughed, actually laughed at a story she told about one of her students accidentally writing, "I love you," instead of "I love food" on an assignment. They were halfway through the main course when it happened. The front window of the restaurant exploded inward. It wasn't a rock or an accident. It was a body, one of Won-shik's outer security detail, thrown through the glass like a rag doll, crashing across a table in a shower of shattered crystal and blood. The other diners screamed. Chairs toppled. Someone dropped a wine bottle and it burst on the tile floor like a gunshot. Then came the real gunshots. 3 men came through the destroyed window. 2 more through the kitchen entrance at the back. They were fast, coordinated, wearing dark tactical clothing and carrying short-barreled weapons that Marie's brain couldn't process because her brain had stopped processing anything except, "This is how I die." The restaurant erupted into chaos. Civilians dove under tables. A woman screamed so loudly it didn't sound human. Glass crunched under boots. The air filled with the sharp, acrid smell of gunpowder. Won-shik moved before Marie could draw her next breath. He grabbed her by the waist and threw her, not guided, through behind the thick marble bar counter at the side of the restaurant. Her back hit the wall. Her ears were ringing. Through the gap between the counter and the floor, she could see shoes running, sliding, stopping. And then she saw Won-shik. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He stepped toward the attackers. The first man came at him with a weapon raised. Won-shik closed the distance in 2 steps, seized the man's wrist, twisted it at an angle that produced a sound Marie would hear in her nightmares for years, and stripped the weapon from his hand. He drove the heel of his palm into the man's throat with a force that dropped him instantly, not unconscious, but finished. The attacker crumpled to the floor, gasping, and didn't get up. The second attacker fired. Won-shik was already moving lateral, fluid, impossibly fast for a man his size. He flipped a table onto its side, using it as cover for exactly the half-second he needed to close the gap. When he reached the shooter, he didn't disarm him. He dismantled him. An elbow to the jaw, a knee to the ribs. A final, devastating blow that sent the man's head snapping sideways with a crack that echoed off the restaurant walls. Marie couldn't move. She was pressed against the cold marble, her hands shaking, watching the man she had kissed on a mountain veranda 2 nights ago become someone else entirely. Every movement was precise, efficient, brutal. There was no hesitation, no mercy, no fear. Won-shik moved through violence the way other people moved through conversation naturally, fluently, with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing this his entire life. The third attacker, the biggest, coming through the kitchen, raised his weapon and fired twice. Won-shik rolled behind a pillar, came up with the gun he'd taken from the first man, and returned fire with a calm that was more terrifying than the shooting itself. 1 shot. Clean. The attacker dropped. The remaining 2 men hesitated. That was their mistake. Won-shik didn't give them a second chance. He was on them before they could regroup close quarters, savage, efficient. In under 90 seconds, all 5 attackers were on the ground. Some were groaning. Some were not making any sound at all. Won-shik stood in the center of the destroyed restaurant, breathing hard, a gun in one hand and blood on his knuckles, some his, most not. His coat lay crumpled on the floor where it had fallen. His shirt was torn at the shoulder. His eyes were dark, flat, and completely empty of anything Marie recognized. He turned to look at her. Marie stared back at him from behind the counter. She was shaking. Tears were streaming down her face, but she wasn't crying, not really. It was shock. Her body was reacting to what her mind hadn't caught up to yet. The man standing in front of her was not a CEO. He was not a businessman. He was not the gentle, quiet, almost shy man who had cooked her mackerel and kissed her while the sun went down. He was a killer, a professional, a man who had just incapacitated 5 armed attackers with the cold efficiency of someone who had done it 100 times before. Marie. His voice was raw, wrecked. He took a step toward her and she flinched. He stopped immediately, like her flinch had hurt him worse than any bullet. "What are you?" Marie whispered. Won-shik looked at her, really looked at her, and Marie saw it. Beneath the blood and the violence and the terrifying competence, she saw the thing he had been hiding from her since the night they met. Not just his identity, his shame. "I'm the man who was never going to be good enough for you," he said. "I'm sorry." Sirens wailed in the distance. Won-shik's remaining security detail, the ones who hadn't been compromised, flooded in through the side entrance, guns drawn, shouting in Korean. The restaurant was a battlefield. Broken glass, overturned tables, blood spreading across white tile. Marie stood up on shaking legs, looked at Won-shik one last time and ran. He didn't follow her. He didn't send his men after her. He stood in the wreckage and watched her disappear through the shattered front window, and for the first time in his life, Dae Won-shik felt something he had no training for, no instinct to manage, no weapon to fight. Loss. Marie went home. She locked her door, pushed her small dresser against it, sat on the floor of her studio apartment, and didn't move for 6 hours. She didn't eat. She didn't sleep. She replayed every moment, every dinner, every walk, every laugh, every lie, and watched it all curdle into something unrecognizable. The bruised knuckles, the disposable phones, the untraceable cash, the terrified faces of strangers, the bodyguards she had walked right past on a rainy night, smiling like a fool. It had all been there. Every red flag, every warning. And she had looked right at them and seen what she wanted to see, a lonely man who needed love, not a monster who had been hiding his teeth. 3 blocks away, in an idling black SUV, 2 of Won-shik's men watched her apartment. Not to threaten, not to retrieve her. Won-shik's only order had been, "Make sure she's safe. Don't let her see you. Don't approach. Just make sure she's safe." He said it like a man speaking his last words. Back in the heart of Gangnam, in a basement room beneath one of his nightclubs, Won-shik sat across from Jae-hyun, the bodyguard who had served him for 9 years. The man who had been standing 2 feet behind him the night Marie handed back the wallet. Jae-hyun was tied to a chair. His face was already swollen. His right eye was shut. Won-shik leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. His voice was conversational, almost gentle. "I trusted you." Jae-hyun said nothing. "You were there that night. You saw her face. You saw her walk right past you without an ounce of fear. You knew what she meant to me." Won-shik paused. "And you sold her location to Kang for money. It wasn't personal. She could have died." Won-shik's voice didn't rise. It dropped, and the drop was worse than any shout. "The only person in this world who ever gave me something without wanting anything in return. The only person who made me feel like I was something other than this." He gestured vaguely at the room, the concrete walls, the single hanging light, the men standing in the shadows with their hands folded. "And you put a target on her back." What happened next in that room, no one who was present ever spoke about again. Won-shik purged his organization methodically. Every connection to the leak was severed. Every person who had known about Marie's identity and had failed to protect that information was removed. He did it with the cold, surgical precision that had built his empire, and with a fury that frightened even the men who had seen him at his worst. But at night, alone in his penthouse overlooking the city, Won-shik sat in the dark and stared at the single photograph on his phone, a selfie Marie had forced him to take weeks ago during their day trip to a temple in the mountains, her face pressed against his. Grinning, while he wore an expression of reluctant amusement that was, in truth, the closest thing to happiness he had ever felt. He didn't delete it. He couldn't, even though looking at it felt like pressing a knife against his own chest. 2 weeks passed. Marie went back to work. She taught her classes. She smiled at her students. She ate her ramyeon. She did everything exactly the way she had done it before Won-shik, and it all felt hollow, like she was performing a life she no longer lived in. She thought about him constantly. Not the violence, though, that haunted her too, surfacing in flashes when she least expected it, the sound of bones breaking and gunfire echoing off restaurant walls. But what she thought about more, what she couldn't stop turning over in her mind, was the look on his face when he turned to her after it was over. Not pride, not aggression, not the cold emptiness of a man who enjoyed what he had just done. Shame, grief. The face of a man who had just shown the woman he loved the worst thing about himself and knew he had lost her forever. She thought about the estate in the mountains, the way he had talked about his mother, the way his hands trembled, actually trembled when he held her face and told her he didn't deserve her. She thought about how he had thrown her behind the counter before she even knew what was happening. How his first instinct, before the fighting, before the killing, before any of it, was to make sure she was safe. He hadn't attacked those men for power. He hadn't done it for ego or territory or reputation. He had done it because they were going to kill her, and he would have died before he let that happen. Marie sat on the edge of her bed on a Tuesday night, staring at her phone. She still had his number, not the burner, but the real one he'd given her early on. She hadn't deleted it. She opened the contact, closed it, opened it again. Then she put on her shoes, grabbed her coat, and walked out the door. She didn't know where he lived, not exactly. But she knew the lounge where she had first returned the wallet, and she knew the world he operated in well enough now to know that if she showed up there, word would reach him within minutes. She was right. She stood on that same wet street, under that same glow of light from the market signs, wearing her olive sweater and charcoal jeans like time had folded in on itself and delivered her back to the beginning. Within 10 minutes, a black sedan pulled up. The door opened. Won-shik stepped out. He looked terrible, thinner, darker under the eyes. His suit was impeccable as always, but the man inside it looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He stared at her from across the sidewalk like she was a hallucination he was afraid to approach. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Probably not," Marie agreed. "I am exactly what you saw. I can't undo it. I can't change what I am." "I know." "Then why are you here?" Marie stepped closer. The rain had started again, light, misting, catching the glow of the market signs in tiny prisms around her face. She looked up at him, and she didn't smile. Not this time. This wasn't the bright, innocent, trusting girl who had handed back a wallet. This was a woman who had seen the darkness and walked toward it with her eyes wide open. "Because you didn't hurt those men for fun," she said. "You did it because they were going to hurt me. Because protecting me was more important to you than keeping your secret. You let me see the worst part of you to keep me alive." She paused. "That's not a monster, Won-shik. That's a man who loves someone more than he loves himself." Won-shik's composure broke. Not dramatically, he didn't fall to his knees or cry out. But his eyes filled, and his jaw clenched so hard the muscles in his neck stood out, and his hand came up to cover his mouth the way a man does when he's trying to hold himself together and failing. "I will never let anything touch you," he said, his voice barely holding. "I swear it. On my mother's name, on everything I have, nothing in my world will ever reach you again." "I don't need you to keep me from your world," Marie said. "I need you to stop hiding it from me. No more lies, no more secrets, no more pretending to be someone you're not. I fell in love with you, the real you, even the parts that terrify me." She reached out and took his hand, the same hand that had broken bones 2 weeks ago, the same hand that had trembled when it touched her face on a mountain veranda. She held it, and she didn't let go. Won-shik looked down at their joined hands. Then he looked at her, and for the first time, not almost, not halfway, not the restrained ghost of it, Won-shik smiled. It changed his entire face. It made him look young, human, like the man he might have been if the world had been kinder to him. "You are the most terrifying person I have ever met," he said. Marie laughed, a real laugh, the kind that echoed off the wet pavement and cut through the glow of the street and the weight of everything they had survived. "Good," she said. "Then we're even." They stood together on that rain-washed street, the crime boss and the woman who had returned his wallet, and for the first time, neither of them was pretending. The rain kept falling. The city kept humming. And somewhere deep in the machinery of Seoul's underworld, the word spread quietly. Won-shik's woman was back. And anyone who so much as looked at her wrong would answer for it. But Marie didn't care about any of that. She only cared about the hand holding hers, scarred, calloused, and warm, and the man behind it, who had spent his entire life building walls and had let a stranger with a smile walk right through every single one of them. Can Won-shik truly protect the woman who stole his heart when his own men are the ones selling her out? And what will Marie do now that she's seen the monster behind the man she loves? Smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you do not want to miss what happens next. This story is about to get even more dangerous. Drop a comment. Do you think their love can survive a world built on blood and betrayal? Like this video if you're obsessed with this forbidden romance between a woman who gives back wallets and a mafia boss who would burn down his own empire for her. The next chapter drops soon, and trust me, you are not ready for what Kang Sung-jin has planned. See you in the next one, if Marie survives.